Welcome to Slightly Off Script, the marriage show where we remind you that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. I'm one of your hosts, Bethany Needham, here with the recently proven to never be able to become a murderer, Andy Needham.
Well, if this is your first episode, you probably wonder what podcast.
Well, see, here's how this played out. We were mulching today. Is that did I use that word? Is that a word?
It's one of my favorite days of the year. It's like a sign of spring.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we had planned this a week ago, and New England does what New England does. And it was like, joke's on you. I'm going to drop inches, not...
You got the drop.
The timing of that could not have been better. I said drop inches, and then literally my microphone just dropped. Ooh, so many inches. Okay, let's try that again. So, yeah, basically dropped inches of snow on us, and that just put a kibosh on the whole putting any mulch out. But we got to it this week, and as most married couples, I assume, do, as we are out there doing the yard work, shooting the breeze, just casual conversation. I believe the conversation started because you were being a smart aleck and you were correcting me because I was using the wrong word it was a razor blade.
Well, she said, where do I find an X-Acto knife to open these mulch bags, which is the very small tool. That very, very small tool.
Are you mansplaining this again?
It's a very small tool that a woman might use when doing crafts.
Okay.
Or a man.
They're going to understand why we got to murder now. So essentially...
I'm over there digging a hole.
Digging a hole where I'm going to put your body. You corrected me, and then I said it again on accident, and then you felt the need to mansplain again, which, let me just tell you, y'all, in case you wonder, the things...
Trigger Bethany
how
101.
to trigger is, listen, if I'm using a word incorrectly that you've already corrected me on, and I don't care, I don't need you explaining it to me again. And so...
So we went from mansplaining to manslaughter.
Yes. So I made some sort of joke about, I'm going to get an X-Acto knife right now to take care of this. And you were like, you would have to stab me so many times.
This little baby knife.
Yeah.
Pew, 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 pew. It's like do you remember the old movie Men in Black?
Yes.
When Will Smith's character, a different movie, Will Smith's character gets like the little tiny baby gun.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what.
Except that my analogy breaks down because then he uses that and it's way too powerful.
Yeah.
Like that. So failed analogy from a 90s movie.
Nice try, though. First you butchered the actor and then... So essentially, I told you I was not going to be stabbing you. I was going to use it to torture you. And you're like, well... That's a murder you'll never have to worry about me doing because you, when it comes to blood...
I'm very squeamish around blood.
Yes. You lose color in your face very quickly. We've had concerns in the past about you fainting at the sight of too much blood.
Wow.
Yeah.
From mansplaining to emasculating.
We got mansplaining,
manslaughter, and emasculation.
emasculating.
We are like 4 minutes and not even into this podcast.
It's fine. You edit it so you can decide what stays. So anyways, that just led down an obvious rabbit trail of, well, then if you wouldn't do that, how would you murder me? And so you would...
Your suggestion was the only way that I would be able to murder you was to shoot you with my eyes closed.
Yes, so that you couldn't see the blood.
And I was like, no, I'm a nerd. I'm going to do something more like... cut the brakes in your car.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You had way better ideas.
Yeah.
Like a car bomb was one of them.
They weren't like right there. I had to think about it for a minute. It was like, let me open up my notes file on my phone.
So just keeping it real on...
This is wicked dark and stupid.
Stupid good, wicked fun.
Stupid bad, I don't know.
Terrifying. Yeah, so if I die by brakes being cut, car bomb,
Car bomb.
I'm just saying somebody needs to be questioned. But if it's like a knife or a gun, it wasn't him. Go look somewhere else. There was blood involved. He's not there. So
Now I have an alibi.
oh, I don't even know how to.
This is going to be a very hard pivot. I'd like to see how you're going to pull this one off.
Speaking of, just kidding.
What's the big idea we want to talk about today, Bethany?
Not murder. So this has been something that has been on my heart a lot recently. And some of this has been conversations I've had now that we do a marriage podcast. I feel like I'm having more marriage conversations with people, and which is a beautiful thing. And sometimes can be a hard conversation because not just the marriages that are walking through really difficult things, but in some cases, and recently I felt like a number of cases, it was really heartbreaking stories of marriages that were ending in divorce. And I was sharing this with you because one of the things that stood out to me was these were not young marriages. These were not like, these were marriages that they had been together for years. And I don't know, something about it really struck something in me, and I've been processing through this. And I had been listening to a sermon recently that was actually talking about our relationship with God, but I felt like it really actually hit me in terms of thinking of marriage, that rarely do marriages just fall apart, that more often than not, what happens when we're talking about divorce and things is marriages that drift apart. And it gave me sort of this image of, again, this sort of drifting away from one another, and made me think about even our marriage, but also, you know, other people's marriages in terms of one, okay, so I don't think anybody's immune to that. Like, and that's part of what struck me is these marriages are 20 plus years they've been married. And it wasn't like a major thing that blew it up. It was how long had they been drifting, and just the, you know, again, a drift is the sort of picture of not an active thing. They're just sort of fading apart before the marriage ended. And then how do we in our own marriage be aware that drifting can happen? It can happen whether you're 2 years into marriage, 5 years into marriage, 10 years, 80 years into marriage. Like, I think of that old hymn, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Like, we are.
If it's 80 years into marriage, it'll be a very slow drift.
For real. But even a slow drift can be a drift. And so as we were chatting about this, I was like, I think this is something I would really like us to talk about, because we've said this, but this podcast for us in a lot of ways has been even you and I having important conversations with one another, and we just happen to have it in front of a microphone so everyone can eavesdrop. So that's the topic today, the idea that drift happens. We'll go with that title.
I like it.
Drift happens.
Yeah, the passage that the sermon that you heard was based on, I just want to read it. This is from the book of Hebrews, and it's chapter 2 and verse 1. And it says, "Therefore, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it." And again, the sermon did a good job of the context of this is our faith. But I think that the principle of our human relationship and the covenant of marriage has a very, obviously Scripture even talks about the, loving your wife as Christ loved the church. And so there is a definite parallel there that we could see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want to also just say out the gate that one of the things is drifting is actually normal. It's a very, just a natural, unsurprising, however you want to describe it, like it's part of life. And so first acknowledging that, and then what we're going to talk about today is, what are some of the causes of that, and how can we watch for it? And then maybe what are some of the things that we can do if we have found ourselves, maybe someone's listening today and this conversation will sort of alert them to, oh, you know what? I didn't even realize, but I've, in my marriage or whatever, maybe it's another relationship, like there's been some really significant drifting.
I would go so far as to say that it's not just natural, but it's like that's the gravitational pull. Like if you don't do anything, the natural tendency is going to be for you to drift. Like there's just no other way about it. And everybody has a different algorithm in their marriage based on your personality, your story, your sin, your trauma, all those factors, what it's going to look like for you. So as we talk about this, you'll have to apply it to your own marriage, your personality, who you're married to. However, the gravitational pull of the world, of the current that we're in, is not for marriage. There is a celebration even in culture of sort of like, do what makes you feel great. And there's a lot of things in marriage that don't feel great. And that doesn't mean that it's not God's best, but in the moment, it doesn't always feel that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then let's talk about some of these causes. When you think about drift, what are some of the causes that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, just being consumed with other things is one. So like, what's the instinctual response when you ask almost anybody how they're doing? They're going to say, I'm so busy. And that is like a badge of valor that we feel in culture. And so, think of how awkward it would be like if you ask somebody, like, how are you doing? Just doing I'm really relaxed. Like, I'm just like chilling out in my marriage. Like things are just like very non-stressful. Like it's funny almost.
They're going to ask what you're smoking.
Yes, yeah.
That's the follow-up question.
There's a lot of pressure. There's like one side is sort of the hustle culture. Like we need to affirm ourselves by being busy. And then there's just the demands of life. Like how are we going to pay for everything if we don't work our tails off? And we have all these expectations that we have around us. And that ties into the next one, which is our children. They're both a gift from God and they present a lot of inertia, a lot of energy, which is, parenting is such a beautiful high calling. And then as we've talked before, there is a celebration in culture of what I call child-centered homes. And a child-centered home, rather than a Christ-centered home, will not produce a healthy marriage. That is like basically pulling up your anchor and putting your sails up.
Yeah. And I don't know, like the ratio of people that listen and who has kids and who doesn't. But the reality is you could sort of remove the word kids in that, and anything. For some people, it could be, as crazy as it sounds, like a pet-centered home. Like some people are very much kind of crazy about being pet parents. Mm-hmm. It could be a career-centered, like we are all in, all about our careers, whatever, like just whatever that thing is that we're so invested in that takes that energy and time. And again, not bad things, but if it's something that is taking all of our time and energy to where in our marriage, where all we ever bring each other are leftovers and tiredness or,
Sometimes the same thing with our relationship with God, but our marriage, like we have such a high view of covenant. Like we think like, oh, I'm saved. I will always be saved. I'm in a covenant marriage. I will always be married. And so we kind of are like, okay, that part of life is assured. So I'm going to put all my energy in. And if you audited your time and your energy, like even things like your pet, like do you spend more time researching, stuff for your pet, care for your pet, walking your dog? These are not bad things, but
walk your dogs, people.
Yeah. Fenway's about to show up here and
she's like, yes, please.
Just a quick aside. I thought this was funny, maybe the wrong word. You probably don't think it's funny, but you posted this Instagram post this week of like things that like God's faithfulness.
Yeah.
And your first picture was a picture of Fenway and this like really sweet picture of the dog. And you have an old dog because somebody commented, I thought Fenway died.
I know. Oh man, poor Fens.
Oh my goodness.
She's like, I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet.
That is telling of her age, though.
Yeah,
She's been around a while.
I was like, once the person said it, I was like, I looked back at your post, I was like, I can kind of, they weren't crazy for thinking that. So anyway, yes.
That was a rabbit trail. That's so sad. Oh man.
Yeah. And then I think the other two things that I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but that are normal and unsurprising, which is it's very easy to fall into a quiet, resolved resentment. Like, okay, this is just as good as it's ever going to get. And I just got to deal with it. Like, this is my cup to bear.
Yeah, I'll speak to that one first because honestly, this was something that came up for me a number of years ago. And I'm not going to throw anybody on the bus, name any names, anything like that. But when we were younger in our marriage, there were different people in, it's funny, kind of different environments altogether. Couples that I would look at who were further down the line and also loved the Lord, like, and were obviously very committed in their marriage. But this was actually one of the things that was really difficult for me that they were communicating was this idea of a quiet resentment in their marriage. And not that they would say resentment, but like, it's never going to be better than this, these annoyances, frustrations. And I just remember thinking that I didn't want to be in that place. Like, just because we'd been married for at 20 years, 20 plus years, whatever it was, I didn't want to get to a place in our marriage where I just was like, whatever, he's just a pain in the butt and that's just what it's going to be. And so, yeah, this one was a sensitive thing for me because I just remember when I started hearing these things from people married later on, I didn't want that. Like, I not only didn't want that, but I didn't want to be a couple later on that was giving that same message to younger couples that, like, this is where you're going to end up. You're going to be sick of each other, annoyed with each other, and that resolve that's as good as it's going to be.
I have a theory on this, and I'd love to see what you think about this. I think that perhaps this person was over-indexing about, like, when you're young and married, you have wrong expectations of marriage. But then those wrong expectations can become quiet resentments. There's the one side where it's like, everything's going to be awesome all the time. And you kind of have to die to self on that. Mm-hmm. But then on the other side, people can kind of like let their marriage die because they basically are like, well, this is my cross to bear, so to speak. What do you think about that?
No, I hear that. And I actually think that is a big part of right sizing. I think there's a balance of, as you mature in marriage and you grow, there actually does need to be a part of you that determines what expectations are actually reasonable and right and what things are you actually need to lay that down. Like, you do need to sacrifice that, not in a way that creates resentment, but actually in a way that it's growing you, like that I'm growing in humility and kindness or whatever it is, in grace. And that's I think that's person to person, day by day journey of discerning that with the Lord, letting God do that work in your heart. But then the other side is, if there are those things that you're like, I actually think this is something that we need to be intentional and to work on, it's not an unreasonable expectation, then doing the work to actually together work through that, not just you or myself stuffing that down, like you said, as sort of this quiet resentment of whatever. They're just always going to be that way.
I think I actually had to walk through this morning. So
it's getting real.
No, well, I think, having the grace as you work these things out, that sometimes people's first reaction is not the full story because they're still processing it. And so, like, there was a situation, this being a Saturday, I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's a sunny Saturday. I know we have to record a podcast and we need to do the mulching. For me, those are like the two big rocks today. I'm like, if we can knock those things out, then afterwards I can relax. You came into Saturday thinking, we'll get to those things when we are. We're just going to go with the flow. And so little things were starting to just annoy me. Like, oh, you went upstairs and you stripped the bed, but you didn't fold the laundry. And I communicated to you my frustration. I didn't really even know necessarily what I was fully feeling. I just knew I feel, and I wasn't even this articulate, but I kind of said, like, I feel this resentment. That would have been a better way to say it than what I said. And you were patient enough with me to kind of, like, first of all, kind of let that land, give me some space. And then we kind of, like, you had a lot of just insight to kind of walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that you think I had insight. I think for me it was, I had a choice to make in that moment because I was in sort of my own la-di-da-da-da, which my wiring, my expectation was different. And we were coming into a day where we were coming into this day together. And so...
And it's your one day off. Yeah. Which is.
But I'm not a single person on my day off, which I think I said. I was like, listen, here's the reality from my observation. If you were not here today, I have one way that this day would go, which would be, my personality. And honestly, probably never would have got the mulching done. Let's be real. I would have run out of time because I just go through like, oh, I'll go to the gym and then I'll do this. And it's probably also my ADHD. But in that moment, recognizing you have this day, because honestly, you're a much better manager of time where you're like, okay, these are the things we have to get done. If we're going to get them done, better to do them in this order. And I think just talking out like, hey, we both had different expectations. They're not meshing right now. It's creating frustration. And I acknowledged like, ideally, like if it was just me, I'd be doing this, but it's not just me. And I need to be real. Like this is us today. And so, yeah, I was like, I can sacrifice XYZ in my day. It's not a big deal. And it really wasn't. It would not have been good for me to say that if I was saying it to then be resentful about it.
No, we'll just switch. Instead of me being resentful, why don't you?
Yeah. And so I said as much. I was like, listen, I can shift and I'm really not going to be upset about it. And then we'll figure it out as the day goes. And I feel like there was a shift in that. So.
Yeah. Well, I know that you love the gym. So thank you for sacrificing that. I also know that is not usually an efficient time of your day from the way I look at life, but so it's all right.
Yeah. And that, again, this comes back to those little quiet resentments, like you said, sometimes it's just having the honest conversations and being like, you got to put that stuff on the table, not just stuff it down. And I could have also gone into pouty mode and been like, fine, we'll do it your way. But
never would you. All right. The last one we have on this one that's normal and unsurprising, but this is a big one, and we won't be able to unpack all this too, but unhealed wounds is something. And one thing I'll say, like, I've been very proud of you. This last year, you did some intensive therapy around a lot of things that are, they impact our marriage, but it wasn't, the dominant part of the work was about other experience, some of them from your childhood, some of them from more recent years. And, but that work is such an important thing to do because those unhealed wounds, they don't go away.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, the work I was doing brought up things that I didn't necessarily know the root of them.
Yeah.
But I did know that they were continuing to kind of pop up at different times, and you can call it triggers, you can call it whatever, but it was impacting our marriage, and it wasn't enough to just weed it out. Like I had some stuff I needed to really go deep and address, and I think we've talked about it before, but EMDR therapy is what I did, and it is sort of like a trauma type therapy, and you can look it up. I'm not going to say I won't give anyone a tutorial on it, but for me, it was really helpful because we had walked through some hard things with our kids, with different things that for whatever reason, I think my wiring in the moment was to do what needed to be done, but I had stuffed a lot of things down that I never really worked through. And so it gave me the opportunity to do that. And I noticed a massive difference on the other side of that therapy in terms of being able to communicate better with you, being able to notice when things are upsetting to me, like a lot of different things, and for sure has helped overall. So
yeah, and that's a more recent example, but there's other times when we've received mentoring, coaching, counseling, therapy, each of us. And I think of these things, this last week, we got the roof on our house replaced, and most of the wood underneath the roof was like in great shape. But when they got over, we have this chimney. Our house is only like 20 years old. So the chimney is like wrapped in vinyl. It's a wooden chimney with a metal pipe down it. And when they got over by the chimney, they found that there had been a leak. And I know a lot more about this now after this week. From the outside, everything looked fine. Like there was no issues. There's no water coming into the house. But literally like the wood at the top of the chimney was just like falling apart. And they were able to find a quick remedy. But I think it's like, water damage, or another analogy might be erosion. I think drifting is like those type of things where it's like a little bit of water, a little bit of drift, a little bit of erosion. Like it's not a big deal. Like it's not going to ruin anything. And you can honestly continue to live in your house for a long, long time. But that's one of those things that like once that rot started, at some point, if it doesn't get caught, it'll just continue.
Yeah.
And then it also opens yourself like with the house. And I've learned a ton on these things, but like then all of a sudden you're more vulnerable to other, moisture in wood all of a sudden attracts carpenter ants. And then you have a whole nother set of issues. And so I think that's a similar thing. And what would probably happen to that chimney is that someday we would get a huge snowstorm or a big thunderstorm would come through or, microburst, hurricane, whatever. And we would be like, oh, that hurricane just took out the chimney. Mm-hmm. And like, that would be like an interesting story, but it's not really the full story. And I think when we see relationships fall apart or get to that point of crisis, it's oftentimes you have to draw the line back decades, if not at least years, to see where that damage began.
Yeah, that's a good word and a good visual.
Good. You like a good visual,
I
don't you?
do love a good visual.
All right, we're going to switch analogies now. We've been using sort of boat and house analogies.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go, this is going to be like planes, trains, and automobiles, but we're going to go with automobiles.
Yes.
And we're going to use the idea of a dashboard. And when you have that dash light come on, it's an indicator that something is wrong with your vehicle.
This is one of my favorite analogies because I think of it all the time, not just in terms of marriage, but life in general, is this idea of thinking of these maybe warning signs or things that come up that are dash lights themselves don't always tell the whole story, but they do tell you that something needs attention. And so when we were discussing this, I was like, I feel like in marriage, that's one of those things is being able to in some ways learn, because for me, I'm this way. You get a new car and the first time a light comes on, you have to like reach for the booklet if it's not an obvious one and you're flipping through like, what does that light even mean?
Just go to YouTube, basically. That's today's world. Yeah.
And so this in marriage is like, think of it as that first time a light pops on is, okay, what does this light mean? And so like, what are those dash lights in our marriage?
For a while you had this Honda Pilot, which you loved that car. Bruce, as you called it. Bethany names all of her cars.
Yes, I do. It was Bruce Wayne.
Because
the salesman went by Batman, and I told him if he, like, I was negotiating with him, and I was like, if you give me this deal, I will name my car after you.
Yeah. But I this is not exclusive to that vehicle, but I remember this specifically about that car was that there was a check engine light that would come on. And I remember two scenarios where it's like we brought it in, and one time it was literally like, oh, your gas cap needs to be tightened.
Yeah.
So like pop the little button, beep. All right, problem solved.
Yeah.
And then another time it was like, oh, there might be an issue with your transmission. Like, and even checking that out is going to be invasive and difficult. And it's the same indicator. It's just an interesting kind of analogy. But let's think about this through a couple different lenses of types of dash lights that might come on. And the first one is we're going to use mind, body, soul.
Okay.
I think we should mind, body, soul, and spirit. So we'll use soul as emotional. So we do mind as like the intellectual side, body as the physical, soul as the emotional side, and then spirit as the spiritual side.
Genius.
Yeah. Thought of it myself. So I think on the intellectual side, the mind, this is where the intentionality, like our thoughts are so important. The way we think, keeping thoughts captive to Christ, not letting our minds wander, things like fantasy, imagining a different reality, not within your marriage, but a bad way. And then also like communication. And I think the danger here, one of the dash lights to me is if you feel like you have fallen into the rut of being marriage or home managers versus living in a marriage.
Yeah.
That's a big dash light.
Oh yeah. If you're finding that all of your conversation and communication is just logistical, like it's almost like a staff meeting every time you're getting together, that would be a dash light, like, and something to, again, pay attention to. This isn't like you realize that and you're like, oh no, we're getting divorced. Like it's hey, okay, let's take a look here. What's going on that?
Let's get under the hood.
Yeah. Sure. But I do think just being aware of those things, and yeah, the thoughts, I absolutely agree, is being aware of how often your thoughts are wandering or you're just starting to imagine
Yeah.
things outside, like in your mind, trying to build something else rather than working on the thing in front of you.
This is particularly difficult in certain phases of parenting. If you have a lot going on with your career, when that busyness meter is high, your margin for sort of like slowness
Yeah.
is low, and there's a lot of logistics that you have to run. Like I talked to some friends who, and I remember those seasons where it's just like, we used to joke, we're just like unpaid Uber drivers,
Yeah.
racing kids around to different commitments. And that is, there's a lot to manage. There's a lot of mental energy being exerted in those challenges.
I'm going to say something a little controversial.
Bring
but
it.
I just want to state for the record as a reminder to people in that stage of life that they actually do have decision power in that. Like, you are not at the mercy of the amount of sports your kids play and extracurricular activity and things that you involve yourself in, from Bible studies to small groups, even too much of a good thing is still too much. And I think this is definitely something that culture drives hard, is this idea that we have to do all of these things. There's just this doer mentality. And I think that we forget that we actually get, like, we're choosing this. And the question we're asking here is like, if what you're choosing is at the expense of the health of your marriage, I don't care if your kid is going to be a professional baseball player, professional whatever player. I guarantee you that your kid on that professional field or court would actually rather have his mom and dad sitting side by side cheering him on in a loving, healthy marriage.
Preach.
Than divorced parents who can't even be at the game at the same time because of whatever reason. Like, just...
Yeah. You want to talk about some more logistics? Yeah, that's some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, sometimes man, now I'm getting on a soapbox, but you have a choice in that. And
Yeah, agency is present in parenting. You have a say. You are the parent. You are the adult in the situation. Yes.
yeah, and sometimes giving your kids more things to do is actually not providing them with more opportunities as they grow older. What you are doing, though, is wiring them to feel the need to achieve and do more later in life. And actually, one of the things I think in marriage and families and everything else that we sometimes undervalue at an alarming rate is quietness and togetherness that is not built around accomplishment and doing.
Preach. As you were sharing that, I was thinking of one of your favorite movies of all time, Speed. And I feel like sometimes we actually use, like with a car, sometimes we're like, oh, it shakes if you go over 70. I think we actually get afraid of slowing down because slowing down will reveal. And we feel like that, like in Speed, it's like if they go under whatever miles per hour, then
he's going to blow that bus up. Yeah.
But I think we think that, like, if we can just stay running as fast as we can, it's actually like a very, very poor coping mechanism for people to actually do the real work of, like, yeah, I don't really want to spend more time with my kids. I'd rather keep them busy, those type of things, where it's a very, very real thing, but you have agency. I think having some principles, like one thing my parents always had was like, we could only play sports, I think 2 out of 3 seasons. So again, we're not going to we could do that another time. And I think we're going to do an episode just about boundaries and deeper dive on that. But I will say fist bump, preach. All right, let's talk about the physical side of things. And this
wah, wah.
rather than
wicka wicka.
These are the noises that your dad. The audio version of Dash Lights.
Yes.
If Bethany designed a car, this would be what your car would sound like.
Yes, absolutely. This is a big one because I think it can be a very sensitive topic, a very not
touchy.
The problem is the not being touchy. But without jumping all the way to the bedroom, even taking some steps back, I think a dash light being, when is the last time that you were just physically affectionate, not in the bedroom. Like, when's the last time you just hugged one another and held on for a minute? In our house, that's hard because our dog freaks out if anybody tries
Our
to hug
dog
me.
is a jealous dog.
She is. But it's one of the things that I feel like we try to be very intentional is hugging one another, kissing, holding hands, whatever that looks like just a physical closeness that isn't just sex. Like, what does that look like? And I would say a dash light is if there has not been that kind of physical affection. And I would say, for those of you who are like, I'm just not a physically affectionate person, like, set this aside, because there's literal science around the brain chemistry of physical contact. And I think some people use the excuse of, I'm just not a physical person. And sometimes you literally just get over yourself and hold each other's hand. I want to hold your hand. Yeah. Whatever that looks like. I'm not talking gross PDA, whatever. I just mean, like, you're married and don't lose that. Like, it needs, but also be aware.
Yeah, I want to touch on a little bit more on this one when we get to our next section. So moving on, soul, your emotional health is a huge thing. Like, if you're not emotionally healthy as a human, it's going to impact your marriage. Having an emotionally healthy marriage, right expectations. Do you actually slow down enough to really check in on how each other are? Like, do you ask the question, like, how is your soul? Like, how are you feeling? And I think that this is something that we have gotten better at. I mean, you were kind of natural. You're very open and honest. But even in the last couple of months, it's a combination of like some work challenges and like seasonal blues that were kind of impacting me. And we just kind of like owned it and kind of said like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. I don't feel like I'm in a pit, but I do feel like I'm drifting, I feel like a little bit of that just emotional drift, and not necessarily away from you, but that can be a place of vulnerability. And if it's not vocalized and understood, and if it becomes a pattern versus a season, that's a huge place of vulnerability where the introduction of somebody else's affection, attention, affirmation, that is a place where marriages can fall into infidelity very easily. Yeah. Even if and it was interesting, we were talking about this. You were sharing some things about like you've now been working in a secular work environment for a couple for, I don't know, was it 5-6 months now? Mm-hmm. And, I will say like, I trust you implicitly. And I think that you have handled yourself incredibly, but you kind of flagged in your own mind and vocalized this to me. Like, hey, there's been a couple of things that people have said to me recently that just hit a tripwire of like, made me emotionally uncomfortable. And as we were talking about it, I'm like, this is the space, like when you can recognize that and the dash light goes on, that is like really guarding yourself from what could, those are the things that start and then it becomes normalized and then it takes the next step, and then a next step and next step. And then, it could be 3 years from now, you find yourself in a deep end of a pool drowning, and it's only because you got really comfortable being in the shallow end.
And I would say the dash light, one of the things to watch for this is, are you with one another being open and honest about how you're feeling, what's going on, and to be aware of, are those conversations all happening outside your marriage? Yeah. And that's not just with opposite gender. That's if you're only, like as a wife, if you're only talking to girlfriends about how you're really feeling, that either you don't feel safe talking to your husband about it, you feel like not comfortable, whatever the reason, that would be a dash light. Like you need to be able to be open and honest about these things in a safe space that, like, us talking about our emotions is essentially you both have to sort of put down your fix-it tools, because that can be one of the things that, like, hey, this isn't about fixing our emotions. This is just about being open and honest about when we're not doing well, when we're struggling, when we're having a hard time, whatever it is, that you're the person that I'm talking to first and foremost. Not that I can't talk to my other friends, but you need to be in the know before other people.
Yeah.
So
the last one is your spiritual health. And again, we could do a full episode on this, but I want to honor the time that we're in here because we want to get to some diagnosis and repair things. But I would just say, and I think we do this actually kind of unintentionally, but I was just thinking about this, is like being willing to talk to each other about like, what is your perspective on God right now? Like, how are you interacting with him? How do you think about him? And then what do you think God thinks about you? And then how are you loving your neighbor? And I think that those things, because that's really the great commandment, right? Love the Lord your God, your heart with all your mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And we have a lot of conversations about like where we're at in terms of like, how are you thinking about God? Which A.W. Tozer said, how you think about God is the most important thing about you. So like, are you relating to God as like, is it distant? Is it near? Is it judgmental? Is it only grace and no truth? And then how do you think about yourself? Like, are you seeing yourself through the lens of God, through the gospel? And that, yes, you are a sinful human, but you are imago Dei, made in the image of God, loved by God unconditionally, fully and embraced. And that I always think like, what do you see when God, if you were to think of like God looking at you, how do you see that? And then the community part of it is also your neighbor and a relationship. Anything to add to that?
No, you nailed it.
Good. All right. Let's get to some like hope and some. So when we say solutions, diagnosis and repair, we kind of have three categories: maintenance, guardrails, and 911. And so maintenance is the first category. So those are, one part is just your rhythms.
Yep.
Like, and we are always, we've talked about a lot, we're always recalibrating our rhythms based on the season that we're in and where we are. And we've learned some things, but with, that could be daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, quarterly, monthly, annual, and, maintenance we've talked about before on this, but like that we try to go away for a week every year, just the two of us. That's one of the key maintenance things that we do. But there's other things in that space. Anything you want to say?
I would tie it to both. I'm going to tie it to both analogies here when I think about maintenance, because one is in most vehicles, there are dash lights that are just letting you know about a regular maintenance.
Yeah.
That is just that reminder, which is great. But in terms of the drifting side, to think about maintenance as we do need to be regularly rowing in a direction, because if all we have is our paddle pulled into the boat and letting it go, then again, that natural pull is going to be away. And so maintenance is that putting the paddle in the water and rowing towards one another. And so some of that, like you said, is broken down into weekly, think about that date night as row your boat. Like, you don't want, the rhythm we're trying to avoid is that for 12 months of the year, we drift. And then once a year, we row like crazy to bring our boats back together. And so it needs to be, and again, not everything needs to be an overnight away. Sometimes if it's a crazy time of life with everything else, sometimes it's just weekly. Hey, we have a dinner where we sit down, we have a conversation. But think, like, in terms of that visual, what does that look like for you to regularly put the paddle in the water and row towards one another?
Yeah, I remember times when we would like feed our kids chicken nuggets, put them to bed, and then we would make a meal or something.
An actual meal with vegetables.
And a steak or something.
Yeah.
And then another thing on maintenance is something that we've done, which is like having times where you say, okay, for this season, we've had times where we're like, we want to be praying together every day. I know couples that do that every day for their whole life. Honestly, we don't pray together every single day. Maybe this is a good reminder, but I look at it as like, okay, that is one of those things that like we do that for a season and we say, like, hey, for the next month or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that has also been true for us in terms of intimacy. And we have had times where we have said, we're literally going to sit down on Sunday and we're going to schedule out our intimacy.
You choose your code word that goes on that Google Calendar, whatever it is. Maybe it's just an emoji.
Prayer.
Yeah. Prayer time. Yeah. And I think oftentimes people get the wrong idea. Well, that just takes the romance and the spontaneity and everything out. And I mean, truthfully, it does take the spontaneity out of the thing you scheduled. But in terms of, I can attest to the fact that it does not take the romance out and sometimes, again, this is not an all the time thing, but recognizing the season that you're in, what are the things that are pulling you apart? If busyness and an overcrowded schedule, then it's really just about putting the same commitment and whatever you say, like set everything aside for this thing because it's important. And so, Yeah.
Hey, just because you schedule out your desserts doesn't mean you can't occasionally get another bowl of ice cream. So.
Yes. Also, you can go off script.
All right. Maintenance and
Just
then
slightly.
just slightly. Maintenance and guardrails would be the next one. And a guardrail is a point of correction where like you are off course but hitting a guardrail is very different than going off a cliff.
Yeah.
And so like one of the things we've talked about often here is just a pattern of repentance and forgiveness and realizing that failure is a part of marriage. Like if you don't recognize that you will fail within your marriage, then you will have a failed marriage. And so that is just one thing. So being in a culture where there are no secrets, create your culture of openness. We've talked before. We share each other's phones with each other. We read each other's journals. There's no secrets in those spaces. And everybody's exact way of doing that may be unique, but the more transparent, the better.
Think of guardrails too as you do need to have an awareness of the vulnerable places in your marriage.
Yeah.
And also just think of it in your marriage, but also in seasons. So there are certain guardrails that you may need to put up for certain seasons. And so we've mentioned obviously busy young kids season. There could be the empty nest, almost like all this time that you could spend doing things that are not helpful to your marriage, like whatever that is. And because that's what guardrails are, like, right? They're put on the edge of a cliff for a reason. And so for us, one of those has been a big part of what this podcast is, our values. Like our values in some ways have been built around.
This is the course we're supposed to be on. So you can look at these things and be like, okay, it's almost like the four tires on the car. If this is out of alignment, then we're going to hit a guardrail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so community, I would say as an example, is one for us, the guardrails of having people in our lives that are pushing us back towards a covenant of our marriage is a huge because if we're starting to veer off course, having those people that are like, whoa, okay. And their willingness to, and that is us also being open with these people. And so, that's definitely.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, the last one is the 911. And so you just pray about it and you're good.
Or AAA, depending on 911, AAA.
Yeah. This is a hard one for a couple of reasons. Sometimes one person in the marriage thinks that we're a 911 and the other person's like, oh, we just need to go away for a weekend. And it's tough. It's tough to know, to diagnose that. And I think that the main thing you have to recognize, this is an expectation setting thing, is we don't get into a really crisis spot in our marriage quickly. And the same is true of health. If you've been married for 3 years and there's been festering resentment for 3 years, the idea that you're going to go meet with a counselor for an hour and then walk away, even for 3 months doing that every week, that's just like unrealistic. It's sort of like somebody who's out of shape going to the gym and walking out after going for the first time and being like, it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you don't get unhealthy quickly, and getting healthy is very uncomfortable, miserable, and oftentimes you're going to have false starts. You're going to have things that you try that don't work, and you're going to go to a counselor and it's going to be a bad fit and it's not going to work. You're going to do it for 6 months. You're going to feel like you didn't make up any ground. And like part of it is like, if you have to have a level of commitment to the goal of health that is stronger than the discomfort of staying unhealthy.
Think of it too, like in culture and everything else, that gravitational pull that is pulling you away from one another, you making that decision that we need to heavy row to even have a chance to come back
against the current,
is you're against the current, and recognizing that in some ways it's not just going to take at least as long as it took you to drift, but it's going to be harder and maybe take longer. And I know that sounds like this awful, but the reality is it's worth the effort.
Absolutely.
It's worth the effort.
And you don't have to get all the way to where your destination. Perfect, you'll never be at, but get to your destination to have joy back in your marriage.
Oh yeah.
But it just having an expectation, understanding that it's going to health is slow. It's not fast.
Yeah.
And it takes time to do it. And you're going to have to ask different, it's funny, like to go back to the analogy of the roof, I've learned so much about roofs and chimneys and chases, and that they're all different sizes and how much money they cost. And this guy, I tried to have one solution. I reached out to somebody. They weren't able to help me. I had to reach out to somebody else. Now, hopefully it doesn't take years to fix our chimney, but there's an intentionality of, and I could honestly right now, like they put it back up, they kind of put a Band-Aid on it. And I could be like, well, it's good. I don't know if we're going to own this house for 20 more years, so I'll just let it be. And that would be a dangerous way to lay. But I just want to say it's not a failure to admit that you're unhealthy. That oftentimes is the starting point of health. And so I just want to encourage those. And I know that there's people that are probably listening to this that feel like we want to portray a very positive, optimistic reality that by God's design, marriage can be awesome.
Yes.
And yet, if you don't feel that today, we just want to say you're seen and you're heard, and there is hope.
Yeah.
And it's a slow grace, but it's a good grace.
And just like your whole analogy with the chimney, it may require experts. It likely is going to require investment, and probably a financial investment at that. And honestly, it's probably going to disrupt your life some in the process. Just like having roofers up there pounding away. Like if we just are trying to keep this, we want to fix our marriage, but we don't want to mess up what's happening. Like when you're in that 911 space, like it's time to start disrupting some things again for the health of your marriage. Like it's worth some disruption in your routine, even in your kids' life and their routine, whatever you have to do to make the investment that's needed for this long-term health worth it, so worth it in the end, even if it's hard now.
If nothing changes, then nothing changes.
Yes. Yes.
And you will not drift towards health. But I want to say thank you, Bethany, for fighting for health, even this morning, for being willing to hear my imperfect emotional response. That sounds so like buttoned up. For me feeling kind of being a jerk for a minute and you being gracious with that. A smart aleck, as you said earlier.
Yeah, see, I'm getting better with editing myself.
If you don't, I have to. So, but anyway, just want to say thanks to everyone for tuning in and for listening. And now that we're done our task for the day, I can finally relax. So.
Yep, I'm probably going to go hit the gym. So everybody wins. All right. I love you, babe.
I love you too.
Thanks for listening, listeners.
Bye.
Bye.